On April 27, 1865, a steamboat tore apart in the dark on the Mississippi River. The death toll was staggering. When the sun came up, more people were dead in the water than the Titanic would take half a century later. Yet, if you search for the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, you will find a story that has largely vanished. Almost no one knows this happened. The ship was called the Sultana. She was a steamboat pushing upstream against a flooded, freezing Mississippi River, carrying a terrifying amount of human weight. The men standing on those overcrowded decks had already survived the hardest years of the American Civil War, escaping conditions that should have killed them. The war was ending, the Confederacy was collapsing, and thousands of Union soldiers were finally released from captivity and sent on the long road north. Most of the passengers on the Sultana were prisoners of war coming directly from the Confederate camps at Andersonville and Cahaba, enclosures where disease and starvation were the daily reality. Months of malnutrition had reduced strong soldiers to walking skeletons. Their bodies were ravaged and their strength was gone, but they were alive. Stacked 3 deep on every available inch of the boat, they were finally safe, dreaming of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, of their mother's kitchens. They had survived the hardest years of their lives against impossible odds. A routine steamboat ride up the river was supposed to be the final step home. But at the docks in Vicksburg, Mississippi, a financial incentive was in play. The United States government paid private steamboats a set contract, $5 for every enlisted man they transported, and $10 for officers. The Sultana's captain, J. Cass Mason, discovered one of his boilers was leaking. A mechanic told him 2 boiler sheets needed replacing, a job that would take days and cost Mason his massive government payout. Mason chose the money. He ordered a quick, temporary patch of thinner metal applied over the boiler so he could stay on schedule. Meanwhile, the Army officer overseeing the transport, Captain George Williams, refused to split the waiting men across other available boats. Suspecting other officers were taking bribes to divert men to competitors, he insisted every single soldier board the Sultana. The Sultana was built to safely carry 376 people. On this trip, it held over 2,100. Packed into the upper decks, the sheer mass made the vessel top-heavy. Every time the crowd shifted, the entire boat tilted. A patched boiler, a single massive payload, and a top-heavy ship. A cascade of profit-driven decisions stripped away every engineering safety margin the boat had. At 2 a.m, 7 miles north of Memphis, the river was swollen and black. The spring thaw brought a violent, freezing flood stage current. Pushing against that rushing water, while carrying 5 times its weight, the ship's engines worked at maximum capacity. Inside the belly of the boat, that temporary patch strained under the pressure. Then the boiler gave out. The explosion tore upward through the crowded decks. Roughly 400 men were killed instantly, either by the blast or the expanding steam. Within minutes, the wooden superstructure of the steamboat collapsed, trapping men below, while the rest of the ship erupted into fire. The men who weren't killed by the explosion were thrown into the icy water. They were so weak from months of starvation, they lacked the strength to fight a rushing current in the pitch black. Soldiers who survived the darkest corners of the war died miles from home, sacrificed by the men who were paid to bring them safely back. The precise numbers are debated, but up to 1,800 died in the water that morning, which brings us to the question, how does a tragedy of that size disappear from the national record? The answer lies in the calendar. April 1865 was the loudest news month in the 19th century. Just days prior, President Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. The timing was brutal. Lincoln's killer, John Wilkes Booth, was cornered and shot the very morning before the Sultana exploded. The nation was entirely consumed by the aftermath. Compounding the problem, the telegraph lines throughout the South were heavily damaged. By the time word of the sinking reached northern newspapers, it was buried in the back pages, overshadowed by the mourning of a president. Historical memory is often dictated by what the public has the emotional bandwidth to hear. That week, America was already full. As this map shows, even the physical evidence of the disaster eventually faded. Over the decades, the river naturally shifted course, migrating away from the explosion site. Today, the remains of the Sultana do not rest underwater. They sit buried 20 feet under dry Arkansas dirt. The gravesite of over 1,000 men is now a quiet, sunlit soybean field. The river moved on, and so did the country. By uncovering this forgotten echo today, we finally give these survivors the memorial they were denied.